Alrighty. Hi there, everyone. I'm Andrew Gautron, and I also have Kirk Deininger here from Autocene. Today's webinar, we're going to be talking about apprentice management, so apprentice hour management, apprentice tracking for your business. So apprenticeships can take many different shapes and forms, right? There's always going to be some amount of hours that your apprentices are going to have to track against certain journeymen. You're also going to need to file certain amounts of paperwork for taking on those types of people in your organization. And really, how do you keep track of all of that? How do you begin to engage in an easy way of allowing apprentices to participate in your organization and also give them the best resources available to guide them along in their own personal career journey, right?
Andrew, if I may, in addition to individuals, this could also be used, or the same concept used for companies. We're getting a lot of interest from state agencies around diversity, and they have different programs that these companies need to go through and trainings. So you can think of it for that as well.
Yeah, exactly. You could definitely leverage these same types of applications for grants and participating in grants that are offered. Okay, so if you're new to Autocene, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of start off on the homepage here. So number one, Autocene is completely web-based. That means that you're not having to install add-ins on your computers or your mobile devices to engage with the applications that are built on this platform. So that means it's also accessible from pretty much any device that hosts a web browsing capability, right? So you can face this out internally, externally, and really have your environment sit where you need them so that people can engage with that environment. Now, when we log into Autocene here, Autocene is role-based, and that means everything that takes an action within the environment that is controlled by the person and their profile here is going to be dictated by roles and kind of responsibilities that are run by business rules, right? So a really simple example of that is if I myself am a part of human resources, I might only be able to see human resources applications or data that reside in the environment. And that's all accessible in every Autocene environment. And you also have the capabilities to really inherit structures that reside maybe in your Active Directory structure or your human resource information systems. So for today's webinar, we're going to be really talking about the kind of suite of applications that meet the apprenticeship hour tracking programs that you may have at your organization here. So there's going to be about 3 applications that we're going to discuss today. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the Applications tab here. The Applications tab is kind of the home where all your Autocene apps live for that person. So I've just searched out our on-the-job training hours log and our experience log to begin engaging with, so I can begin starting these applications. So there's kind of 2 apps that are available for your apprentice to engage with in your organization here. And the first one that we're going to talk about is how do we even submit hours, okay? So we're going to open up our on-the-job training hours submission here. And what that's going to do is that's going to start our application up here. And it's going to list out kind of the requirements behind that. So because we're logged in, we can begin to fill out information in terms of who that apprentice is. So they don't need to file their name, what type of program they're with, or what even date that we're dealing with. They're going to go down to their on-the-job training hours here. So depending on your program, there's going to be categories and subcategories that deal with different requirements of that program, right? So if you're an automotive shop, you're going to be dealing with specifics around certain aspects of the vehicle, right? Where in this case, this is more around the idea of an electrical technician apprentice, right? So depending on your business and what type of programs that you're you're hosting for apprentices to take part in, you can begin to configure these applications to inherit that information. So that's really easy for that apprentice to submit their hours against it, right? So in this idea here, what we're doing is that I'm an apprentice who's apprenticing for line electrician here. Well, my available categories that I can begin to submit against are all represented in these drop downs. So inputs in your Autocene applications can receive data, they can send out data from not only the app itself, but external sources, things like pick lists and databases, or RESTful services that you may have connected to other software solutions. So let's say that today I've done some transmission work. Well, there is only one subcategory for transmission work, but maybe if we were doing cold distribution, there might be different subcategories based on that selection, right? So this allows the apprentice to really get into what they're doing, right? And their journeyman will work with them to let them know it's like, okay, we're doing this category today, so you could go submit that in your on the hours submission, right? So let's say that I'm doing some wire stringing today. I'm going to say that we did this today. Maybe they're submitting hours for a previous day, so they have the flexibility to come into the day picker and then select those hours, right? Maybe I did it for 3 hours, and then maybe I helped Bob string some wires, right? So as we're kind of going through this, obviously the categories in which we're recording hours against are fundamental to this system, right? So we're tracking against those categories. But additional tertiary information that your business might require or that you want to keep track of, things like notes or things that kind of fall outside of the requirements of that apprentice's program, you can add and configure that to your application, right? So you can submit that along. Now, if I needed additional attachments, things like additional documentation or something along those lines, depending on the program that you're hosting, you can also add those along with the information that this person is submitting, okay? So I'm going to submit this, okay? So I, John Smith, line electrician apprentice, am going to submit these hours, and what it's going to do is the system's connected me to my journeyman who is looking after my hours, okay? So what this is going to do is this is going to submit the hours forward to our new, to our journeyman to approve on, okay? So you can see, just for the sake of the demo today, it's sent from myself to myself, but in reality, it would be your apprentice to your journeyman to sign off on it, right? Again, you can configure this even further, right? So you could have it submit hours, go to the journeyman to approve those hours, and then even go further, go to, say, payroll or human resources for them to sign off on as well. So what does the journeyman get? Well, the journeyman gets a notification that their apprentice has submitted on-the-job training hours, and I have an action available to me to take for these hours here. So I can directly take action from within the email there and automatically go to the action. So it could be approve hours or reject hours, or I can go over to the actions queue over here, and I can go directly to all the hours that have been submitted, depending if I'm managing multiple apprentices, okay? So if I go into the take action over here, I can again be directed to that same submission from John Smith here. So let's say that we're going to approve John Smith's hours. Well, I can click that action. Actions, again, are relegated to how your application works. So in this case, we can approve or reject, but actions can be configured to pretty much what your application is trying to accomplish, right? So if it's, say, a purchasing application, you might have a certain set of approvals, yes. However, at the end of that, you might need a cut PO action or send to finance, things like that, right? So you can engage with that. Now, actions, they can take you to additions in the initial submission, so we could see all the hours and have an additional section pop out and you can engage with that, or they could be entirely separate screens or user interfaces that you can also engage with. In this case, it's a very simple approval interface that I'm saying approved. Our approver is Jane Doe, who's the supervisor here. They're going to submit that and then confirm those hours, right? So now we have an audit trail of kind of hours submitted, hours approved, right? And again, you could continue on that workflow if you wanted to. Well, that's great. So we have hours being submitted, we have hours being approved or rejected. How do we have oversight on what is happening? I, as an apprentice, I could go into my application status over here, and I could technically go through and add up all the hours that I've submitted. I could keep track of it on a separate piece of paper to make sure that it's meeting certain requirements. Or I could go into the work experience log over here. Now, the application status, what this does is it basically allows a person to come in. They can view all their submissions and drill down on those. So you always have hierarchy about what was submitted on what day. But really, what you want to provide is an easier user experience to that. And we'll just go over to the work experience log here. And the work experience log is going to pull up my account, right? So I'm John Smith. My apprenticeship program requires 7,000 hours. Well, how many hours have I submitted so far? I've submitted 1,061. And you can see that based on information that's going through the system, we can keep track of percentages, right? So technically I'm 15% complete because I may need a certain amount of hours run against a certain category or subcategory to fulfill that requirement, right? So how do we know which requirements I need to do, right? So we can go down into categories. So cold distribution, tree trimming, transmission work. Well, I could go into the transmission work that I just submitted for and see that 16 hours are required. And you can see that I've submitted against some of those, right? Well, let's go home. That's great. You can go through each individual aspect here in subcategory to ensure that you have the recommended hours so far. And of course, you could view the log behind that as well and see when they were submitted, so on and so forth. Or we could go down into our actual most recent work experience log here, right? So maybe I recently set polls with Derek. Well, I could go in and view the submissions on that day, right? So I could go in and see, oh, we did this and this. Well, what went into that? Well, there's some notes, and then there's some approval behind that. And that's when you can pull that additional documentation in as well. So if you have certain documents that say that you were on there on that day, you can pull that in and begin viewing that, right? So that this entire application is just basically dedicated to showing the person where they're at in their apprenticeship journey, right? Now, how could you take this further? What are some steps that you could, say, take today and configure this to meet other needs, right? Well, number one, you could have an administration version of this, see multiple different apprentices, where they're at in their hours journey, right? Give you the oversight to view that information. Again, that's all possible within Autocene here. You have access to your data at multiple different layers. Well, Kirk talked a little bit about kind of fulfilling grants that you might be applying for, or there might be certain aspects or programs that you want to apply for that require this type of information. Well, you could run these numbers against grants and keep track of that, right? So that's great. We're recording hours. We're viewing where hours are going in terms of our program. Well, we might want to make this add-on. So begin adding other applications to fulfill this type of system. And that's where we have customers utilizing something like this, where they've started to consolidate training resources to go along with these programs. So again, like there are other categories that we were submitting against, like cold distribution or underground work. We can actually go in and provide the apprentice the ability to drill down and view certain resources around that to help them in their program, because your business may have best practices that coincide with these types of categories or subcategories, right? So if I wanted to learn how to dig pole holes, right, I could drill in. There could be a blurb about how we go about that, and the resources like the job on the job training resources that your organization might have. You could also link that here for that person to navigate, right? This is good not only for those apprentices, that's good for training resources in general for your organization, right? But so if you're out in the field and say a lead hand or a supervisor wants to kind of have a meeting about a certain type of work that maybe the group hasn't done before, this is great. Everybody can pull up these resources. We can walk through what type of work that we're doing that day, see what the best practices are in terms of safe work, and then you could have additional sign-offs. You could interact, say, your daily safety meetings into those. Really, the sky's the limit with where you kind of take this application in accordance with, say, tracking hours or kind of daily operations. Is there anything you want to add, Kirk, so far?
No, Andrew, I think you covered it pretty well.
Awesome.
It's a pretty straightforward types of applications, but it saves folks a lot of time.
Yeah, exactly. So before we close out today, let's touch on kind of how you can have Autocene in your own organization. How do you, what does it cost? How do we structure kind of how you pay for this? We at Autocene, we have a subscription model, which you basically subscribe to 5 application templates. So what I've shown you today, the on the job hours submission and the work experience log, that's 2 applications out of 5 that would be in that subscription. If you wanted to add, say, additional application like the training resources, well, that would be 3 out of 5. We keep it really simple for you. Basically, whatever you tailor that application template to be can be that actual application, right? So if you have extensive workflow requirements, extensive integration requirements, or extensive kind of I'm forgetting the word. Basically high volume requests, you can utilize those application templates however you want. There's no additional cost behind that. So definitely, if you're interested, follow us at autocene.com. You can get in touch if you want a further demo or some more information about this. But as for today's webinar, that's it. We look forward to seeing you in the future to view kind of our future webinars and where we're going with different use cases for Autocene.
That's great. Thank you, Andrew.
Awesome. Thanks, Kirk.
All right, you bet. All right, take care. Bye.